All right, everybody, good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be. It is 11 o'clock by my watch in Chicago, so it's time to begin. Thank you for attending this PowerCast, IBM Developer's Guide to DevOps and CI/CD Pipelines by Donna Westmoreland of Mid-Range Dynamics North America. This PowerCast is sponsored by Mid-Range Dynamics. My name is Ian Cartwright. I'm Education Manager for Common, and if you have any technical issues during the presentation, go ahead and send me a chat message and I'll address your issue. If, however, you'd like to send a written question to the presenter today, Donna, you can use a Q&A area and Donna will answer your questions at the end of the presentation as time permits. Presenting today is Donna Westmoreland. Donna is CTO for Mid-Range Dynamics North America and has over 25 years experience with the IBM mid-range systems and supporting consistent software change methodologies. Experience gained from leading major products, including application modernization at hundreds of corporations, has given her a well-rounded view of development needs, audit requirements, and testing principles. With that, I'm going to hand control over to Donna and ask her to take us away. Donna, could you unmute yourself and go ahead?
Hi, everybody. I just thought I would say hello because we're going to be doing it from the PowerPoint today. And I wanted to say hi to everybody and thank you for joining us. We are going to be just taking a look at the way that we see CI/CD today and what the impact is on the IBM world. And we're going to do it from a developer's perspective as opposed to from a network or administrator's perspective. So how does it relate to us and what do we need to be aware of as we move forward? So thank you guys for joining us and I hope you enjoy the presentation. So again, my name's Donna Westmoreland and you guys are welcome to reach out to me before or after the session if you have questions or is anything that we can do for you to help you to understand what's going on in the world of change. And absolutely, it's the most constant thing in life, and we just have to embrace it and know it's going to be there for us. And we do have to move forward. And so change is going to be part of what we're going to be talking about today and the strategy of how to manage change. So I thought when I was doing this, I actually was at a wonderful regatta this weekend and I was asked to fill in my name on a raffle ticket and the lady made a comment about, oh, you write really neat and small, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's from my coding days when we actually had coding sheets where we had to fill in the little squares. So stepping back in time, it made me think about all the differences there were today from what it was when we first started in IT, but how many of those things remain the same. So even though we're going to step back in time, you're going to be really surprised how consistent the strategies are from the very beginning all the way through to what we need to see today and beyond. So I started thinking about the first kinds of change requests I got. And really, literally what people would do would be walk in my office, sit down by my desk and tell me what they wanted. And I had all these little Post-it notes on my monitor, and I would fill out a little Post-it note. I'd stick that Post-it note up on the monitor, and that was my project tracking system. And of course, there was no timelines because everybody wanted their stuff right then. ASAP was the standard of the day, and we were always struggling to try to meet everybody's needs. And I was constantly rearranging my Post-its to keep them in the right order so I could keep track of what I needed to do. So thinking through how far we've come from there, it's also kind of some of the same things over and over. So a little bit of a background and history on the evolution of software management. Back in the 1960s and 70s, we had something called version control. It was a very manual process. Everybody had to fill out forms and pass forms in, get them approved so that things could be worked on and things get moved into production. That's really very much a very mainframe kind of mindset. But that mindset also moved forward. So when we got into the 80s and the 90s and we started doing a lot of things in the mid-range world, we started thinking about change and managing change as well. And we had a very simple term for it. It's a term we still use today, change management. It just meant we were making sure that we were controlling things in some way as we were moving through our test environments, keeping track of things. A lot of it was manual, some of it was a little bit automated, but there wasn't a lot of tools out there at the point. By the 90s, there were tools on the IBM I that were designed specifically for the I to help us to make changes. Some of those products are still around today for the good or the bad or the ugly of that. They are still around. Some of them have evolved and embraced the new century. Some of them have not. But what we're seeing today is the strategies that have evolved over time. So software development, ALM, there's all kinds of different terminologies for it, but that's what we started with. That was the beginning of the automation, where we first started having something help us to make changes. Then, of course, as we moved into the new century and we started really having multiple platforms, and we started having a lot of networking things going on and having applications that were web facing, then all of a sudden the world started changing. And in the beginning, it was chaos. I can't tell you how many times I went into a shop to find that there was an application that was written, and it was written on somebody's PC, and nobody ever took that source off of that guy's PC and put it somewhere safe. So then all of a sudden, that application needs maintenance to it, and the source and the PC are gone because someone has gotten a new hardware, or the guy left the company and nobody noticed that that was the only place that source resided, and it was a disaster. So then that happened enough times on the open source side of the world that they realized they needed some controls over things as well. So there was all kinds of tools that were getting built, and all kinds of different ways to think about how to manage things. And DevOps evolved. And DevOps is a strategy, and we're going to talk about that strategy as we move forward today to help us to kind of go back to the basics, where everybody knew everything that was going on, that we had coffee rooms, and we would stand in the coffee room and talk about what was going on and what needed to happen when, and all that kind of communication that over time, over the years, as organizations grew, as IT departments grew, that we kind of lost sight of that. So DevOps was our way of kind of rethinking that strategy and how we can keep everyone in the loop. And then, of course, because our environments have become more and more complex as time has gone on, different kinds of applications residing on different types of servers across our enterprise, then CI/CD pipelines came along. They are going to be our lifesaver. They are automation, the most accurate automation process we can come up with today, and they will continue to evolve. So in 10 years, that's going to be the norm, as opposed to a unique new thing that people have started to do. So keep in mind, that's there to help us to automate and to manage our process. So as time has gone on, it's still doing the exact same things as we did in the 1960s. We've got source, we've had executables, we have to track where they've been, where they're going, who tested it. All of those steps have remained the same. So the most common thing that we think of on the I, which I think is kind of the way that we first started talking about a development life cycle, and that was SDLC. And SDLC is really a very standard way of thinking about the design, the coding, and testing, and implementing into test environments, and having external testers test things, sending it out to the right place, making sure that we can maintain it. All of those steps are things that we do today, and it is started from this SDLC. So that was kind of our original foundation. Now today, though, when I walk into a business or start working with one of my customers, and we start talking about what we need to do to manage change in their environment, I feel like this is how they see it. And when I saw this picture, I thought it was a perfect example of there's too much stuff. I can't control this. There's just too many things to be to manage, to think about. They've made it too difficult. So when that's being said, then we want to step back and look at the basics of what we need to do to make these things come together. So when we're doing this, let's think about it in a much more simple term. And the first thing about that is going to be project management. Oh, sorry about that, guy. Project management is really the beginning of tracking our requests, gathering information together to make sure we're making good decisions, using our resources wisely. So there's a number of different ways that we can manage projects, anywhere from an Excel spreadsheet to a Post-it note to utilizing automated tools that help us with our project management. In the past, we've used a theory called waterfall, and we probably didn't even know that's what it was called because it was the only thing that was out there. We did our requirements, we did our design, we did development, we did test, and we did deployment. And those are very standard steps. The trick is with waterfall is we did them one at a time. So if I had a big project that was going on that was going to take a long time to code, I literally did everything, all the requirements at once. And then I did all of the design, and then I did all of the development. So sometimes by the time we got to test, it's a year later, and what the users need is no longer the same because it took us a year to get there. So this was the big negative to waterfall, and this is what prompted people to start thinking about better ways to do this. The other thing that prompted us to do that is the internet. When people have web pages and they have to change things, and it has to be quick, and they want instant management of those processes, that's what started the concept of agile development. And agile development is the same steps. They're just going to be happening in a shorter cycle. So instead of us waiting till all the requirements are there and all the design is there before we start developing, we take sections of what we're going to change, and we use that to help us to build this particular science. So the science of the development life cycle is the same. It's just now going to be accelerated. And the way we accelerate it is we make changes in smaller sections, and we'll call those sprints. They're usually anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks long. And those sprints are what lets us say we're going to do a small section of the work. So I may not be doing something from beginning to end. I am just adding the basics in. It might be my database change. It might be some additional fields that we're putting in to gather data, but I don't have to have the reports yet. I just need the data getting into the system. So there's different ways that we can approach that. And the sprint cycles is what allows us to take those small subsets of changes and work on those. And then while this cycle is going, the next cycle is being worked on. And then the next cycle is being worked on. So I don't have to sit around and wait for a lot of testing to go on because I have this small set of stuff that's getting tested instead of a huge set of things being tested. So it keeps us all in a rhythm, and it makes it a little bit easier for us to allocate our resources and to deliver results more quickly. And really, the deliver the results more quickly is what the management team cares about. For us, it keeps our workflow smoother and makes it easier for us to know what we're going to be working on when we come in that day. And it keeps those crazy priorities, hopefully, from interfering with our sprint cycles. So it lets us have a more concentrated effort on the activities at hand and not have a lot of starts and stops in the process. So Agile is the management tool that we would like to utilize, and we can do it a bunch of different ways. I loved this picture because it had the Post-its on it. But anybody who is using Jira or ServiceNow or many of the others recognize these boards. The Kanban boards are they're there to help us to be organized, to know where we are at any point in time. Some people's is as simple as to do, in progress, and done. And that's it. They don't have any of these extra columns in, but you can add as many columns as you want, because guess what? You're in charge of this. And this can be a great way to learn Agile development, is to take this kind of approach. Now, as time goes on, or depending on your organization, there is another approach to take, and that's called the Scrum process. And the Scrum is really the one that inflicts the 2 to 4 week cycle stuff on us. And that's the one that's saying we're going to do this within this time frame. With the Kanban boards, we don't have to necessarily do it within a certain time frame, but in Scrum, it's a little bit more rigid in that process. The nice thing about that is everybody knows what's going on. Okay, the daily stand-ups, whether you're doing them truly daily or every other day, it doesn't really matter. The nice thing is you know exactly what's going on. And if there's going to be a roadblock or a problem, you're aware of it early on in the process. So that is our way of making sure everybody's on the same page. The testers, the developers, the people that are going to help us to go live, whatever we need in that process to make it happen. This is the great way to make that management process happen for us. It is a little bit of overhead to manage scrums and keep all of that intact. And it definitely requires someone that's on top of it, but it can be very, very effective, especially with those enhancement requests that come in that really don't take a whole lot of time. It's just you have to get them in there and get them done and get them focused on. This is a great way to focus those types of things. So waterfall tends to let us do things in a very structured way. You finish the entire step before you go to the next step, before you go to the next step. With Agile, you're breaking things into little bitty pieces and moving them through in small subsets of work. That doesn't always work for everyone. It doesn't always work for every application. And so there's a hybrid in between. And I've heard it called a lot of different things, but hybrid Agile I thought was a really good way to think about it. And what that means is I may have some things that go through my Scrums 2 to 4 week cycles, but I also have some projects that I know are going to take longer, but we want to keep them independent of what's going on in that Agile development cycle. So we don't want to slow down Agile by doing this long-term project. So a hybrid helps us to be able to incorporate that into our project strategies. And remember, they're strategies. They're there for you to help you to do your business. Everybody's going to want to make their own adjustments to the way that that works to make sure that it's a very comfortable place for you to be. So don't think you have to marry in 100% into any of these strategies. They're there as best practices. They're there to give you guidelines, but you need to make up the strategy that works the best for your organization. But definitely you want to look at moving more towards an Agile development cycle, even on the IBMI. So sometimes people think that the IBMI is exempt from this process, and it absolutely is not. And so we have to be very careful that we are always looking to move forward and to mesh with the other organizations, IT departments and sections where they're doing web development or other web facing or customer facing kind of processes. We need to be involved in that throughout the process. We don't want to be the guys that are hanging behind because this is the way we've always done it. We want to be able to move forward and to be incorporated and be part of that process. Now, DevOps, let's talk a little bit about why is that different from what we've done every day for the last 15 years. So when we talk about DevOps, we're really talking about coming up with a structured cycle that is a never-ending structured cycle. So in other words, I don't have a monthly release or a weekly release cycle. I will then start putting changes in as they occur. Now, some of my smaller IBMI shops have been doing it that way forever, so it feels no different to them. It's just a new term for something they've done every day. The larger the organization, the more structure we find around these processes because there's more risk involved and more risk of what to do when things don't go as well as we expected in production. So we tend to be more cautious. So DevOps was scary for my financial guys and for my manufacturing guys. Those are the two areas I have found that most people hesitate for the DevOps process because they are concerned about their end product or their financial processes. So we want to make sure that we're taking that into consideration. But DevOps is a great strategy. And the idea is we're going to be constantly in motion so that things are going to move very effectively through our cycle. And we're changing things and notifying everybody about this process. Now, this is a very common, the infinity symbol is a very common DevOps signal, but there's really a very important team that's not really represented in that picture, and that's the testing team. So when I think of DevOps, I really think that it's a marriage of these three organizations or teams within our organization: the development team, who's going to be doing the analysis, the coding, the code review, those types of things; the team that does the testing, that makes sure that we're not going to break anything when we go to production. And that testing process, whether it's automated, manual, whatever it happens to be, a combination of different teams that do different types of testing. I love it when we have user acceptance tests built into this process as well, but that testing is so critical to this being successful. And then the operations team being the team that is responsible for things in production, and usually is responsible for putting things into production. So these three teams together really constitute DevOps. It's that we're all linked together and everybody gets that notification, and those processes are monitored to make sure things are happening in the way that we expect. So DevOps and that infinity cycle definitely are describing how we want to work, and these are the three teams that are involved in that process. So let's just think about some of the fundamentals of DevOps, and we will hear people talk about it all the time. Everybody has their own opinion of what DevOps stands for and what it does, but these are some generally accepted explanations, and so we're going to go with those today. DevOps fundamentals, the first piece is the development team. It's understanding those requests, understanding the impact analysis. If I'm in an IBM shop, I'm also including dependency information and those types of things, so that I know that if I change this particular object or this module or this service program, what the impact is going to be. So those dependencies are even more important on the I than they are on a lot of other platforms. In addition to that, when I say impact analysis, I'm not only thinking about what's on the I, I'm also thinking about what's not on the I, that is other applications that are going to be accessing data or making requests from my application. So when we have those external connections, those also need to be part of our impact analysis. And knowing about that and understanding that is key to being successful in that analysis and planning stage. Of course, we're going to make our own code changes, making sure the coding is done correctly, do our own unit testing, and a lot of times we'll do our own unit test code testing right in our own development environment before we ever leave there. One that gets missed a lot, but is a very powerful tool, is code review. Again, it can be automated, it can be a manual process. Make sure the tools that you have in-house help you to do these things. All of those things are critical for the development team. This is what makes life easier, is to have automated tools to help us in these processes. Tools that tell me about dependencies, tools that tell me about cross-platform relationships, that help me to do my coding and my testing, etc. Those things are part of our development fundamentals. On the testing side, we want to have a number of different tests. So not just one person testing, but we hope that we have our developers or someone on the development team doing an initial unit functional test, then quality assurance, making sure that the processes work the way they were intended to work. That could also include some functional testing. But in addition to that, regression test. And regression test is the one that gets dropped the most often, but can be one of the most critical ones. And that is, I didn't break anything else. So regression testing is a really important part of that process. So a lot of times we'll do critical path tests to help us to make sure that we haven't broken anything. And a lot of times those kind of critical path tests can be automated to make it very easy for us to run those tests over and over. If we have good tools to refresh our test data so that we have good representative data to do the testing with, and can replace that data to be able to do that same test over and over and get the same expected results. That's a critical part of our testing processes. Approvals is also important. In knowing who has signed off on something is a great way for us to know that the testing has been successful. So those approval steps, even though we don't see those as part of the cycle, when we look at DevOps and we look at the CI/CD pipeline stuff in a few minutes, the one thing that is suspiciously absent in any of that is approvals. And we all know everybody has auditors. Some of us have bigger auditors than others. Some have SOX auditors, some have HIPAA, all kinds of different audits that have to go on. So not only as we go through these fundamentals and we define what steps need to be taken, we also have to always make sure that the right person is doing that step and that there are gates and stop points that we have to go through before we can go to the next step. So even though when we're talking about DevOps, most people don't mention approval processes, it really is critical to a strong change control process to make sure that all the right people are involved in the steps and the changes that are made. The right people have tested it and the right people have said, yes, we're ready to move forward. The operations teams are typically the team that is responsible for deploying changes into production. There may be a subset of that team, the operations team, that's their primary responsibility. Sometimes people wear multiple hats, and that's one of their levels of responsibility is to deploy changes to production. That can be a little thing or a big thing, depending on what's going on. And I don't know an operations person in the world that doesn't think that smaller changes going in is better than bigger changes going in. So keeping those changes small, even if those cycles are faster, there's still a lot of control there and there's less risk. Smaller changes, less risk. So we always kind of keep that in mind. Most important for the operations is monitoring for performance, monitoring that things are going the way we expected it. That's part of what their job is. If I could add anything to the testing steps over here, I would add performance testing, because sometimes what happens to customers is, yeah, it did great in this test environment with a subset of data, but we never ran it against a big set of data. And as soon as we did, things went terribly, terribly wrong. So performance testing, especially if we can do automated performance testing, is a great tool to add to our toolbox. So DevOps, the fundamentals, development, test, operations. That's who we look at and think about when we're talking about DevOps. But again, DevOps is a strategy. We have to have a way to implement that strategy. And that's what we'll be talking about in a few moments. It's a collection of ideas and practices, and it references technologies, and we do use a lot of things like Jira and ServiceNow and things to help us with our DevOps cycles. It's the actual movement of the source and the objects that is critical, and that technology and the automation of that technology is the next thing that we talk about, CI/CD pipelines. Now, we may not have called them CI/CD pipelines for the last 15 or 20 years, but we've been doing it to some degree or another. What CI/CD pipelines today means is it's a much more automated process, and it is something that is enterprise-wide, not specific to a particular platform. And that's one of the things that's been the hardest for us. And so we have to reach outside of our comfort zone to start talking about that. So we mentioned DevOps and the concepts of DevOps, the concepts of agile development. All of those are a way to do things. The CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous delivery, that's how it happens. That's the mechanics of it. So when we talk about CI/CD, we're saying this is the way that we're going to release changes. And we're going to do it the same way every single time. We're going to follow the same workflow. We're going to go through the same quality gates and the same authorization gates every single time we do a change. So that consistency in the process really makes it a very sustainable process. Notice these: plan, code, build, test. We saw those earlier when we were looking at the SDLC. It's the same fundamentals we've been doing since day one. We do our analysis, our planning, we do our coding, we check our initial processes. We do our builds. We do this until we're comfortable. We release those into test. When they're completed in test, then they're released into production. They're pushed to all the places that needs to go. And then, of course, we monitor. So continuous integration, continuous delivery. Sometimes it's called delivery. Sometimes it's called deployment. I kind of think of the whole thing as deployment, and this section is being delivery. But CI/CD, the concepts are the same. We're following a pipeline. We're following through these test cycles. If I'm in my own little ancillary world on the IBM, then I may have already a software change that you may, a tool that you're already utilizing. If you have things across multiple platforms, then you may be getting pressure from people about, you need to be part of the pipeline. You need to be part of this process. We want you to adapt everything you do to do it the way we do it. And that's not a very realistic goal. So what we have to do is think about a hybrid for this part of our process as well. So I stole this picture, and I'm going to fess up to that right now. I pulled it from an SAP website, but I pulled it because this is a very good example of all the different kinds of tools that are used on the open source side to manage this process. So in the IBM world, if I was just doing it on the IBM world, it's all centric to the I, so I don't need all these extra tools. I usually can have a single or small set of tools to make that happen. But when we open ourselves up to the enterprise, there's lots of different tools involved in the process. We don't really care. We don't have to be part of any of these tools processes as long as we're part of the CI/CD pipeline. So we can, from the I, drive a pipeline out to the rest of the world and have the IBM trigger calls to all of these tools, which is what most pipelines do. Or if we are working with an existing pipeline within our organization, maybe it's Azure, maybe it's Jira, there's Bamboo, there's a lot of different types of pipelines that are out there that have been developed over time. They all do a very similar process, okay? And notice what they're called: plan, code, build, test, release, deploy. Same stuff, same things that we looked at in the very, very beginning of this presentation. It's the same types of things that are out there. The differences are that we use different tools, and the I has tools that are separate from these tools, or they can be utilizing some of these tools, but not necessarily all of them. Jira is a very good example of something everybody can use. But then when we start moving towards deployment type things, it gets very, very complicated if you're trying to do IBM deployment from Jenkins or some other tool to initiate those processes. It's doable, but it's not easy. So what we want to do is, again, think hybrid. Think, how can we make that happen on the IBM And there are tools out there today to help us to do that. There are change management products that have been evolving and growing and utilize a lot of the CI/CD pipeline concepts built into their products. They will not be vendors that haven't made a change to their product from the 90s. It has to be somebody that's been making changes and adapting their products for today's world. So when we implement a CI/CD pipeline, it's called establishing a pipeline. It is going to be part of a workflow from DevOps, but the pipeline is going to be the automation of that process. And that automation can come from many different sources. What we have to do on the IBM is find the right tools to connect to the tools that you're working with and decide how you're going to do that connection. We are going to be thinking about what our strategy is going to be. And one of those big things is, are you truly embracing agile development? What does that mean to your project management strategy going forward? And if that is going to be the policy and process, how do you adapt that to the IBM for your organization? And every organization is different on that. A lot of it has to do with what applications reside on the I as opposed to what applications are in the cloud or on-prem applications that are being managed by development teams in-house. So there's a number of different options, and we have to take all of those into consideration. The most important thing I can tell you is make sure that if your organization is talking about CI/CD pipelines, somebody from the I needs to be at the table. They need to be at the table throughout the process to know and to understand and to point out what is IBM centric that needs to be unique for that organization, that team to be successful, which may be different from what everybody else has. You want to evaluate your existing tools and against what your new strategy is going to be. So one of the things that we find that people are asked about a lot, and people tend to want to say, people being non-I people many times, is wait, you need to do this differently because this is the way we do it, and what we do works for us. And so you probably need to be doing it the same way we're doing it. And Git is probably the biggest example of that process. IBM developers can get some benefits from Git, but they also have tools built into the I to help them to do many of the same things. And their vendors have tools to help them to do many of the same things with sometimes is not as much overhead. So depending on how you are going to develop your environment determines which tools you need to be using. Nobody's going to say that the tools they use today that are tools they've been using for 15 years are the right tools to use for the next 5. There's nobody out there that knows that that's not, that doesn't know that's a bad choice. So we want to make sure that we realize we have to evaluate new tools now. We need to make sure the tools we own do what we need it to do. If they don't, we need to go in and search for the tools that will do it for us. So we need to make sure we're at the table and that our tools are going to be there to help us to make it happen. So evaluate what you have today, look to what you're going to be doing in the future with the new strategies. And if you don't have the right tools, this is the time to start looking for them. Testing environments. This is probably one of the most important things that I find that people neglect in their search for DevOps, and that is getting a good set of test environments that we can consistently provide to our process over and over again. So we want to make sure that our process is in place and that we have good testing and that we have good ways to refresh our test data. We also need to make sure that when we build our test environments, we're taking external dependencies into account. So we may have to set up multiple partitions to have different kinds of connectivity so that we can test with our IBM data and all these other applications that need to have access to that data. The most important thing that we can remember to do there is our library lists. Don't forget how powerful those tools are. Try to keep people from hard coding things on the I, even those external calls. That just makes life so much more complicated. And there's lots of great ways around it. The people that have WebSphere are probably the ones that I see struggle with it the most. And that's just because WebSphere has been around a while and nobody really understood the options that were available to them at the time. And of course, things have improved over time as well. But you don't need to have hard coding to make your environments work. The less hard coding you have, or the fact you have no hard coding, means that you can be much more versatile in building and spinning test environments up so that people can run tests very, very easily. Test processing and building test environments is probably the thing that is hardest to explain to a non-IBM person and how complicated it can be to build an environment. So we want to make sure that we learn how to do it quicker, faster, smoother, use tools to automate those processes as much as possible. And of course, if we can have multiple test environments in the same partition, that just means that life is a whole lot easier and new environments are much faster to build. The next thing that we want to think about is identifying how to link to existing automation tools. So if you have external tools that are helping you with testing, or external tools that are helping you like Git or SVN that are doing branching for you, whatever tools you may need to see that you want to link to, make sure your tools are going to all communicate with each other and that they're communicating in a similar way, so that I'm not having to reinvent a whole connection every single time that I'm making a connection to an external tool. Find a tool that helps you to coordinate that effort. When you implement your new automation tools, whether it's a new change management software, a new testing software, combination of both, incorporating Jira, incorporating a CI/CD pipeline, as you implement those tools, make sure you're doing it in a way that does not impact your current process until we know the new tools are going to work the way we want them to work. It does not hurt to set up a test environment specifically for testing those automation tools and make sure they're automating things in a way that you want them, because there's no going back. You know, it really can impact your production environments. So you want to test those just as thoroughly as if you were making code changes to your applications. So when you implement those new automation tools, you really want to make sure you're doing great testing, and hopefully that will allow you to evaluate and adjust the new processes before you go live with them, but also give you a place to go and test and adjust after you've gone live. So keep in mind that all of these new processes, it is going to be an impact on the development environment. It's an impact on the testing environments and the operations teams. Everybody is going to be impacted by changing and incorporating a CI/CD pipeline. But the major thing that we're going to find is at the end of the road is you are going to have a much faster, smoother process. And if you don't, then you need to stop, evaluate, and adjust and come up with the right process to make it happen, because this should be smoother. It should be faster for you. Incorporating new tools, especially automation tools, that really can have a wonderful impact on your up and coming environment. The most important thing is you want to be part of those decisions. Don't let people make decisions and then push them on the eye because nobody went to the table and said, this is the way we need to do it. Not, this is the way we've always done it and this is the way it has to be. So you are going to have to change. There's no doubt about it. The real trick is, how difficult is that change going to be? And how much say do you have in this process as we're moving forward? So keep in mind, we're out there trying to make life easier for ourselves. We want to talk about what those strengths and weaknesses are within the organization, what it's going to do for us. Take the time to understand what the team that is evaluating CI/CD pipelines is trying to accomplish. Understand they're not trying to break your world, but they don't necessarily know the differences in the way that things work on the eye and the way that they work in their environment. And I find that when I look at the teams that do CI/CD and DevOps, more times than not, there's not an I person in the list. And I'm like, how can you have that with a major portion of your data sitting on this platform? Why are they not at the table? So make sure you're at the table. Great tools can make all the difference in the world. I will have to say the hardest thing in any new adoption of these processes is going to be changing the mindset of the people that are going to be using the process, that have done something the same way for so many years, sometimes even decades, to then say, okay, and now we're going to do it this way. We're not even necessarily even changing the codes, the code they're coding, but actually just the process they take to make that code happen. So this is one of the biggest challenges to me that the IBM developer has, as well as learning new technologies, is learning the new change processes and the new strategies to the way change is made. So when you get ready to build your own CI/CD pipeline, whether you're participating in a pipeline that already exists, something like Azure is a very common one that we find within organizations that our customers are utilizing. Keep in mind if you don't have a pipeline tool today, utilize your change system to initiate that CI/CD pipeline. Make sure you have the right type of tool to do that. That's going to take you to the future in the next 5 years, 10 years, etc. Automating these processes, that any of the automation technology that's out there, that's the things that we need to be most cautious about, as far as not being at the table when those decisions are made, because those technologies that they choose, you want them to be eye-friendly, that they have a way to communicate with the IBMI, and in most cases they do. So the light at the end of the tunnel is most of them use REST APIs, and as long as your change management tool utilizes REST APIs to communicate to external tools, then you're going to find that's a very easy transition to make. When we start moving into other technologies, then it's not as prevalent, and you may find that it limits what choices you have. But almost every active CI/CD pipeline tool that I have worked with has REST APIs as part of their communication technology, and that really is the way to go. It makes it very smooth and very easy. So I included this last screen as a reminder, okay? We are responsible for building our own pipeline within our own organizations. We're also responsible for making sure that pipeline includes the IBMI, and that the I is sending information back to the pipeline to let it know what's going on. Now, I have to always include a little bit of security slash audit into this process, and to remind you, no matter how cool that CI/CD pipeline is, it still has to have these controls in place so that we know we are still going to pass our audits, and that we're still going to have the right things in place when it's all said and done. So automating things is great, but we still are going to have certain processes that are going to be manual processes, or require certain approvals from certain teams at a certain step in the process. That segregation of duties, even though we're automating as much as possible, we're still going to have those segregations. We're going to still have gates where we have to stop and someone else has to say, yes, it's okay to proceed on. And then the next step may be automated, but then at some point there's going to be a stop and say, okay, have we done everything we're supposed to do? Yes, and now we move on. So we are going to have those steps in the process. We can automate them as much as possible so that we're not having to update that information in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 different products, so that we have the right trails across the board. So keep in mind, the idea behind DevOps is to make our changes more smoothly and quickly. But in addition to that is making sure everybody's in the loop. CI/CD pipelines is designed to make that happen, to make sure that we are taking that logic and applying it in our environment in an automated way, which helps us to make sure that as we get ready to move forward, we are part of that process, and that we are participating in a way that always shows what value the IBMI has to the organization. So we don't want to be excluded from the pipelines, because that makes us look like the stepchild. We always want to be part of those processes. We want to automate. We want to be part of that. We want to be in the forefront if possible, so that it always reminds our management teams that the I is important to the organization, and make sure that they understand that it can keep up with everyone else. So I'm going to ask to see if there are some questions that are out there that we might want to address before we stop. So, Ian?
Great, thanks, Donna. If you do have a question, you can send it using the Q&A portion. If you can't see the Q&A portion, the thing you want to do is just hit escape and then go into Frames View for this Zoom meeting, and then it should appear on your right. All right, so this first question is, actually a couple people have questions about Git. What about Git? Is it critical to use Git to use a CI/CD pipeline? And also, can you please highlight some benefits of using Git for IBM I application using library-based source control? So talk a bit about Git if you could.
Sure. Git is a wonderful tool. It's designed to help us to, probably the most common utilization of it is to be able to do branching. So in other words, I have several sets of changes that need to be happening simultaneously to the same source. And I need to be able to know at some point that I can merge that source together and incorporate those changes as one as it either moves forward into testing or onto production. I want to be able to do that merge capability, and that visibility of comparing things together is one of the things that Git's really good at. Another thing it does is it builds us a source repository. So we have a system, a record of what the copy of source is that's in production. And it is a great way of also having historical information available to us as well. The negative to Git on the IBM I is the fact that it is an external tool and it makes it a little bit more complicated to work with. Even if it's loaded on the IBM I, it is not necessarily something that everybody's comfortable with. The reason that I always question my customers that want to go to Git is, what are you looking for it to do for you? Because a lot of times what they're looking for it to do is not really going to do it for them on the I. And that is the fact that when I am merging changes on the I am not just working with source. I have executables associated with that source. Unless I am doing Java code or PHP code on the I am probably doing COBOL or RPG. And COBOL and RPG means that I can't just automatically merge stuff. I'm always going to be wondering, did I get it in the right spot in that particular code? Because not all of my code is free form. Some of it is in a more controlled process. So I have to be very, very careful of that. So there are some advantages to using Git, especially if you don't have any kind of change control in-house. At least it's managing your source. However, it is not a replacement for a good, strong change process on the IBM I. And the main reason for that is I can't just use a branch of source to do any testing. I still have to have executables. I still have to have a database. I still have to have a set of libraries to do this in. So there's not a one-to-one kind of advantage as there is if I am doing an open source type process. So Git has its advantages, and there are some great tools. Our tools, I know we have the choice of if you use source members or if you use Git, we manage it either way. So it really is the user choice, but it's not necessarily something that is always going to give you what you are looking to find. So make sure you have very clear reasons for making that jump to Git, because it is a jump and it does take a lot of time and learning to get there. Make sure you're going to get what you expected out of it. So it doesn't give you change control. It does not give you test environments. So it only will do one part of a change process on the I for us. So we just have to be careful of that.
All right, questions about handouts and replays. Yes, this session was recorded and there is a handout associated with that replay, the presentation slides from today. That will be available tomorrow morning on the Common Learning Management System, and I'll send out an email to everybody when that is up. This next question is, any thoughts on how to leverage a pipeline for old style software? Most old code, I think, is better deployed in bulk. Without feature flags, for instance, it might be difficult and it's impractical to recode everything.
Okay, those are good questions. A lot of times what we're talking about on the I see that people do to become more agile is to make their database changes ahead of their program changes. So if I'm adding new fields, for years we've done that. We've put the file out, recompiled everything ahead of time, and then come back in and make the changes as we need to. Or maybe it means that I'm making a database change and I'm expanding and adding new fields. I might choose to only do the file change and the data updates and then wait on the reports to the next cycle or the next cycle or the next cycle. So it's more like splitting the work into a way of organizing those changes to go in, as opposed to trying to break down the code changes I need to make to a monolithic program. And monolithic programs are just monolithic programs. There's unfortunate that they exist, and if everybody has the time to modernize them, absolutely do it, because it'll make your life easier from this moment forward, because it would play better into an agile environment where we can make changes faster. But a lot of times we have to take that into account. So the hybrid approach that I mentioned earlier for agile development is one of those things that can be very, very helpful for. So CI/CD pipelines are designed to automate those processes, and it's going to automate a very long development cycle as well as a very short development cycle in exactly the same way. It's all about timing. Okay, so we want to make sure that if we do know that we have projects that are large, that we can do them in a separate environment. One of the things to look for in your change control tools on the IBM I is that ability to have branches for sprints and branches that manage long-term development efforts. Because on the I, we know there are always going to be some of those projects that take longer, that can't be a short cycle project. So if you have good branching in your change control tool, then that branch that has that long-term project can work completely independently of all those sprint cycles that are happening. And at the end, when you're ready to move into production, you can then evaluate what has changed in the interim. So you can change at any point in time, you can change at the end of the process, you can do your source compare and merges, making sure you don't lose a bug fix or an enhancement that was done in a sprint cycle. So when your long-term development effort gets ready to move forward, it's treated as a way to reevaluate, make sure everything you need to have changed has been changed as part of that implementation cycle.
All right, last chance for questions. Send them in via the Q&A thing. This question is, so this customer has MDCMS for source control. Does he have to move to Git now?
No. Actually, most of my customers, that's the product that I use, but most of my customers do not go to Git. And if they do go to Git, it is a down the road type thing. So usually what we tell our customers is, if you're changing your change control tool, that is a big ask. It's a lot of work for everybody, just because it's a change, it's something new. What we find is our customers are super excited about the products and what they do for them, but it is a change. So we usually say change in place, replace the old product you have with MDCMS, get up and running, and then if you want to go to Git, we'll move you to Git. If you want to do this, we'll move you to here. But don't try to change the whole world at one time. If you're changing change control tools, do your tool change first and then do the next step. But MDCMS definitely does support Git, and we support the ability to have some applications in Git and some that still use source files. So you have a lot of choice in the way that gets managed. So I would assume other tools are moving in that direction as well.
All right, last chance for questions. We have time for maybe one or two more. Let's do this one because it's come up a couple times. Where do you recommend to start in order to start to adopt the whole CI/CD pipeline process? And if you're interested in DevOps, what should people do first?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, DevOps is the process, and the CI/CD pipeline is the automation. So if you're going to have to adopt something first, the first thing that you want to look at is the DevOps cycle and thinking about agile development. So learning how to break that work down into smaller sections, and that is probably the very first thing. If you're looking at agile, there's a lot of great books out there. There's a lot of great videos. Man, there's YouTube like crazy on DevOps and how to implement DevOps, keeping in mind you're on the IBM I, so you have to make some mental adjustments because our processes are a little bit different, but the concepts are the same. So definitely adopting a good project management system that's going to help you to track is important to that process. But then, of course, just thinking through that DevOps and those notifications. One of the biggest complaints I hear when I go into a shop is we didn't know they were changing that. And there's no reason in the world that people shouldn't know that a change is coming or a change has gone in. That's all about notifications, whether it's emails, whether it's updating a tool, whatever it happens to be. Everybody should be aware that changes are going in and what changes are there. I have some customers that on a weekly basis, every project manager gets a list of all the objects that changed in the prior week. And that is an automated function that comes, that is generated and sent to them on a weekly basis. They can do it on a daily basis. They can do it quarterly, whatever they want to do. But a lot of them do it on a weekly basis. So they start the week knowing everything that changed in the prior week, everything that changed over the weekend, because that happens most often. And then they're aware of those changes.
All right, we are at the end of our time. There were some good questions today, and it was quite a good presentation from Donna. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you. You're welcome. I'm very happy to be here today.
All right, the replay and the handout will be available in the Learning Management System at Common from tomorrow. Everybody have a good day.
Thanks.